This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, hello, this is your host, Harry Wilkinson. Welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. This is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks events and approach them from a higher perspective. We approach them from a higher perspective by looking at what it is we're creating and what it is we can learn from it and how we take our power back, if you will, from what seems to be outer circumstances and re-engage in a healthier and higher awareness of who and what we truly are. That's it in a nutshell. Hopefully you've maybe listened to the show a time or two before, so you might know a little bit more about what it is we actually talk about when we talk about such things. But basically, when you think about how we have our own stories retold and repackaged to us, it's very interesting. That's what we have our media for. Whether it's the 24-hour news networks or the radio or the pundits that we listen to or the opinion makers and so forth and so on, they're each telling a story. They're each telling a story we've created. But the interesting thing about media today is that it not only is repackaging and reflecting the stories that we're telling ourselves about ourselves, but have you noticed in the past 5 to 10 years, the stories that we repackage or that are being repackaged for us and retold to us are repackaged and retold using different prisms, using different points of view. It certainly isn't new, but it's taken on unprecedented meaning, I think, in today's world and in today's media coverage. Here's a good case in point that I can kind of illustrate what I'm talking about here. This weekend is commemorating the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. This is the March on Washington that was organized by the Southern Christian Council and many other active participants of the civil rights movement, where there was a march on the Washington Mall, and of course it resulted in Dr. Martin Luther King giving his historic I Have a Dream speech, which, by the way, and I'm not sure if I ever really knew this, but what I learned this weekend from watching some of the coverage of this is that Dr. King's speech, the beginning of his speech, was very written out and had been meticulously edited and written, and was very sort of intellectual, very kind of cerebral. He makes a point about the United States of America having written a check to African American people that it did not cover, and that it was time to cover the check. They were interesting sort of parallels and those sorts of things. But what happened was, apparently he felt that his speech wasn't being particularly well received, that he was losing his audience. And being the preacher that he was, being the orator that he was, he decided to wing it. In other words, he had made a similar speech before about the dream he had, the vision he had of people living, black and white children hand in hand and so forth and so on. And Mahalia Jackson, the famous singer, was there, and she had heard this before. And she called out, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." And that inspired him to call upon that speech he'd given before and work it into this speech. It was off the cuff, from what they were saying. Apparently, he had only been given 9 minutes to speak, and he had used up those 9 minutes before he launched into the "I have a dream" part of his speech. And so it took tremendous courage for him to not only, throw the script away, as it were, but to go well past his allotted time to speak. But that's what he did, and that's how the "I have a dream" speech occurred. All right, now back to my point here. Is I was looking at the news media coverage of the commemorations. It was basically a reenactment on the mall of the march. And there were many speakers from today's civil rights movement and the King family. There was much discussion of things like Trayvon Martin and Emmett Till, a comparison between the two. And there was a lot of speeches and then a reenactment of the marching. So I began to check around to see how all of the different networks were covering this. And I basically looked at three of the biggest sources, which are MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. I did not look at broadcast news because those tend to be, in the evening after the occurrence. It's not live coverage, so I'm quite sure that it was all covered. Certainly on the local news radio here in Washington, D.C. area, it was covered quite extensively and talked about quite a bit, but there was no live coverage of it. MSNBC had live wall-to-wall coverage of the event starting from, I'd say, maybe 10 in the morning, 10 or 11 in the morning, and going on into the afternoon, following all the speeches, all the reenactments, and winding up with the march itself. And there were many commentators on it, lending their perspectives, and some very interesting interviews. It was a very comprehensive, complete devotion of 7 hours of broadcast time to this event. So MSNBC, as many of you may know, is considered to be liberal-leaning or leaning left in its political focus. And that's going to what I've been talking about, the prism that we look through and repackage our stories into. Now, popped over to CNN. And CNN has, some commentary from the mall, which is being interspersed with other coverage of other events and other discussions. So it's not a full look at the situation, but it's very inclusive and with updates, continued updates of what's going on the mall. So CNN tends to or tries to be, neutral. They try not to come from a left or a right perspective, which gets, in this environment, harder and harder to do. But they did include some coverage of the march on Washington. Now, over at Fox News, Fox News, as many of you may know, is the conservative network, the Republicans' network, the right-wing network, as many of people speak of it. And I watched, and I watched, and I watched some more, as much as I possibly could. Not a word about the March on Washington. It wasn't even mentioned for must have been 45 minutes to an hour that I was going back and forth. This is during the time when the speeches are going on and the event itself is going on, and MSNBC is having live coverage, and basically Fox devotes most of its time to Syria and what's going there and why aren't we in there and questions of this nature. So it's very interesting, and this certainly isn't the only difference between coverages of events between these three networks, but it's the most recent one that I can recall, and I think it really makes my point that not only are we telling stories about ourselves and who and what we are, we're repackaging those stories, or we're having others repackage those stories and tell them back to us in a way we want to hear it, or not talk about it at all, ignore it. I mean, part of recreating a story is, not making particular parts of the story as important as they might be otherwise. And so it's interesting how we reframe and repackage and retell our stories. And when you look at what's coming at you through the media in this way, it's fascinating. You have a choice now of different stories that are being told in different ways. If you don't like how the story was told this way, let's tell it this way. And you do get in some cases a different perspective. In some cases you get a perspective in which important information is either left out, skirted around, or given little consideration. And when I think about it, what it reminds me most of is the New Testament and the sections pertaining to Jesus' life story that were each written from a different perspective, from a different apostle. Now, there's the three apostles that much of the story of Christ is told through, and each of them have a different perspective, but they're very close in nature. They're very close in the history they're telling. In one version, you have the Beatitudes, and in another version, you see a different side or a different history of what took place. Now, the only one that is radically different is the Apostle John's version of it. This is a very different version of Jesus. John's version of Jesus tends to be more personal, and it also presents a Jesus that's more complex and more mystical. Many of the mystical traditions of Christianity come from John, as well as other Gnostic teachings as well. But so, getting back to the prism through which we tell our stories, the way we are telling our stories now reminds me of this. So that what makes the Bible or makes the New Testament effective is that you have the same story about the same man being told from a variety of different angles. So you get a different kind of view of this man from many different perspectives. And that's the benefit that we can actually have if we take a step back and, as we say, look at these things from a higher perspective. You can see the different ways that these stories are looked at and being told, and through that you can take in what may be truly important for your personal growth. Unfortunately, not a lot of people do that. Most people are locked into hearing the story told the way they want it told. So you have people who watch Fox News because that's the way they want to hear their stories, and you have people who can't stand Fox News and want to watch MSNBC, and then you have people who watch CNN who think they're getting a more balanced approach, which may or may not be the case. But the important thing to keep in mind as we look at these things is maybe if we lift ourselves up out of our tendency to lean towards one style of storytelling or another, and we take a look at a different perspective. Just open-minded without, having to agree or disagree, but listening and seeing what resonates. Maybe we can get a better, greater, more, or a perspective that's higher through synthesizing all of them. So I don't mean that you should spend your day watching the 3 networks continuously. That would probably drive anyone a little bit batty, but that was my sort of experience with it, and but I was gratified that at least it was covered by one network, this March on Washington, because it really was something that I'd wanted to see, and I had a chance to actually see it in a way as if I was almost there. So that was terrific. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about guided imagery, which I've been meaning to get to for the past 2 episodes, and I've touched a little bit on it, but I'm going to go more in depth here. So, what is guided imagery? Well, as I mentioned in previous broadcasts, guided imagery is a visualization exercise, and it includes vivid images that you hold in your mind. And you can have, music accompanying it. You can have aromas, like scented candles, that may also help in guided imagery. But basically what guided imagery does is it helps to reduce stress, and it helps to, among other things, open up different areas of your experiencing the world that may be more or less shut down in a way. Images are the first ways that we have of experiencing the world. When we're babies and we can't speak and we can't communicate, images are essential. Everything is visual, basically. So in guided imagery, then, we look at ways to become peaceful, to visualize ourselves in lovely surroundings, to visualize ourselves in empowering experiences. And these things have been shown medically to reduce blood pressure and bring you to a more relaxed state. I will first read to you a bit of what is posted on the WebMD website, which is, a medical website, edited and, overseen by, traditional doctors. And it explains what guided imagery may be used for. It says you can use it to promote relaxation, which can lower blood pressure and reduce other problems related to stress. You can also use it to help reach goals such as losing weight or quitting smoking, managing pain, and promoting health. Using guided imagery can even help you prepare for an athletic event or public speaking. Guided imagery is safe. No known risks are associated with it. Guided imagery is most effective when the person teaching it has training in guided imagery techniques. So that is from a doctor's perspective, which you would not have heard mentioned, I'd say 5 to 10 years ago on a website like this. So that's pretty amazing in and of itself. They've discovered that, through their own scientific study, that, it can help with pain, it can help with stress management, all of these things. Besides being an awfully effective way of accessing your spiritual or your higher nature. So, let's go over to Holistic Online and see what they say about it. Imagery is the most fundamental language we have. Everything we do, the mind processes through images. When we recall events from our past or childhood, we think of pictures, images, sounds, etc. It's hardly ever through words. Think, for example, of holding a fresh, juicy lemon in your hand. Perhaps you can feel its texture or see the vividness of its yellow skin. As you slice it open, you see the juice squirt out of it. The lemon's tart aroma is overwhelming. You stick it in your mouth, suck on it, and taste the sour flavor as the juices roll over your tongue. More than likely, your body reacted in some way to that image. You may have begun to salivate. And imagery is the language that the mind uses to communicate with the body. If you imagine a wart and see it shrinking, that's your way of telling the body what you would like it to do. Now, obviously, WebMD says there's no danger involved, and there really isn't. However, we do have negative visuals too. And those can have an influence on how you feel or behave unless you use them as an empowering tool. And here's how you can use some of, if you're sitting and you're visualizing and negative images begin to come up. Here's how you take your, use them as a tool for empowerment. You can take a negative image, recognize it as such, and in fact, whatever fear or negativity it fills you up with, allow that to come up and to the fore. And when it's reached a crescendo point, when it's reached its highest level of intensity, that's when you begin to take the power away from it. That's when you look at it through the eyes of the truth of who you are. That this negative vision, this negative experience has no power over me. This is something I've created in order to reaffirm and reconnect with who I truly am, which is the highest part of the highest mind, the divine mind, if you will. And when you begin to tell that truth to it, and you begin to take the energy from it, you dissipate its power and you dissipate the negative visual, and eventually that negative visual will not come back. It has been made no longer welcome. Now, next week I will most definitely, well, not next week. Next week we're off for the Labor Day weekend, but the following week I will actually give you a guided visualization vocally on the radio, which you can, use, tune into the podcast whenever you want, and use whenever you want. But there's one last thing now I want to talk about before I have to go. And I wanted to mention this gentleman because he's a remarkable gentleman when we talk about issues of peace. And this gentleman's name is David Harris Gershon. Now, Mr. Gershon has written a rather provocative book. Well, it's a book with a provocative title anyway. It is called What Do You Buy the Family of the Terrorists Who Killed Your Wife? I'm sorry, it's called What Do You Buy the Children of the Terrorist Who Tried to Kill Your Wife? And this is a detailing of an experience that he had when he and his wife were caught in an attack, a terrorist attack. And this is in Israel. It must be said that David Harris Gershon is an Israeli. And what happened was, while he was and his wife I'm sorry, it wasn't just... I'm sorry. I apologize. This happened in the summer of 2002 at Hebrew University. And Mr. Gershon's wife, Jamie, was sitting in the cafeteria when a bomb shrieked through it. She was amazingly not hurt, but she was thrown across the room. And unfortunately, the friends she was sitting with were instantly killed. She had burns on her body. She had some shrapnel, but she got out of it alive. And what happened was, Mr. Gershon was having a horrible time trying to process this, dealing with this, and he'd been to all kinds of therapy. And what he needed to do was to try to find the family of the terrorist who had caused this. Not out of revenge, out of a desperate needing to connect with these people. And it's a fantastic story about what peace can do. And I'm going to talk about it more on our next broadcast. But what I want to say is that, I saw this man being interviewed, and it's just remarkable how everything that he said is so in line with the highest teachings and the oldest teachings. And the idea that when you begin to look at that person who tried to hurt you and realize that, number one, they couldn't hurt you, and number two, they are you, and you can see yourself reflected in them. This is a step towards peace that is non-negotiable, okay? You can have all of the agreements and all of the meetings and discussions and compromises that you want. And in this, I'm talking about the Arab peace process, the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. And it will never be effective. It will never be effective until you begin to look at each other in this way of connectedness, in this way of looking at the other as one's self, and knowing that what they are trying to do, if they are trying to hurt you, they're trying to hurt themselves. And that leads inexorably to peace. That's a peace process that cannot be derailed, stopped, undermined by any actions other than one's own self-awareness. And with that, I'm going to leave you until next week. 2 weeks. We're off next week. Till then,